Thank you for joining us for today's Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IOTA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. And I'm your host, Brian Sherman. In today's segment, I'll be talking with Mail Protector's Director of Services, Mark Glowacz. Mail Protector provides its channel partners with a portfolio of cloud-based email services, including inbound and outbound email filtering, email continuity, email archiving, and business-class hosted email solutions. In 2017, the company introduced a simple yet highly secure email encryption service to that lineup. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark to the Secure Connections podcast. Good day, sir.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Glad to have you today, Mark. So I like to begin each podcast learning a little more about our guests and how they started their tech and channel careers. Always makes for an interesting part of the conversation because there's so many different backgrounds, and the stories of how people got into tech can be quite interesting. So where and when did you get your start in IT, Mark?
So I began my career back when being a webmaster was an actual title. Probably around 1998. And that was kind of the tail end of the dot-com boom as well. And well, needless to say, I was having a blast. But I also found myself much more interested in kind of the operations side of IT and how it solved the business problems. So from being a webmaster, I quickly worked my way into network administration, then IT operations and leadership. And after a few years of leading IT for a private education organization, and then a short stint with a state government agency, I decided to start my own managed service practice in 2009. That practice I had for about 5.5 years, stayed pretty small, had 2 employees, subcontractors for projects. And then I was acquired by a much larger MSP and stayed on with them in a leadership role for about 2.5 years. And then just over a year ago, I had the opportunity to join the amazing team at Mail Protector, and here I am.
So you've made the full route to the channel. That's an excellent story. So was your career aspiration to be in IT? Is that what you went to school for, or?
Yes. Yeah. I got my first computer when I was 4 years old and never put it down. I did briefly get sidetracked, spent 2 years in pharmacy school, but quickly realized that I just couldn't put a computer down. So I ended up getting my degree in information management systems.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, let's get talking about security and email, and I know we have a lot to cover today. So let's start off with, many businesses view email as a commodity service. So how can providers create valued practices supporting these business critical communications platforms?
Sure. Well, we all use email today. Professionally, personally, your ISP gives you an email address for free, whether you know it or not. You have Gmail, other free providers. So I understand the view of email being a commodity. However, the business critical nature of email and then today's complex security and compliance climate means that email in and of itself is no longer enough. So the challenge, I think, is providing the solutions that meet security and compliance requirements, but still keeping the experience easy for the end user. And more than anything else, I think that's the value MSPs can bring to the email conversation, is enhancing that security, providing compliance, educating the end user, and wrapping that all around the kind of the ubiquitous nature of email. And it doesn't matter what the email service is. It can be an on-premise server, Office 365, G Suite, whatever it might be. The mailbox, I think, is a commodity. But all the enhancements to that mailbox, I think, is where the secret sauce is at.
That makes sense. I know email has become one of those things, as you said, it's easy. Everybody gets one. They understand, especially the younger generation, how to use it. They've always had it. But when we think from a channel perspective, is like, yeah, it's been there and there's protections in place. So it's it is quite a commodity these days, and making it different, I think, is where you can become profitable and stand out in the crowd too if you're a channel provider. So some of the
Absolutely.
some of the largest security threats in 2018 involved email messages. That's the one thing, we try not to scare everybody and say, look at all of these phishing schemes and everything else that's happening. But what should MSPs really be focusing on this year to better protect their business clients?
Sure. And I agree with you. I think, trying to put a little too much fear can sometimes backfire. But at the same time, these threats are real. And I think one of the largest ones is phishing emails. And unfortunately, that threat is growing and growing rapidly. So the phishing attempts themselves, what we're seeing is they're becoming more sophisticated, and they're leveraging one of the most common problems MSPs face with their business clients, which is weak passwords. And I sometimes think that people don't correlate those things, but the problem with the weak passwords is these spammers are able to compromise email accounts, social media, any other valuable assets that provide them with information to improve the social engineering tricks that then get people to click on things that they shouldn't. So the phishing emails kind of have all these tentacles that we need to be thinking about. In terms of what MSPs can be focusing on this year to really help protect those clients, I think one, and it's easier said than done, believe me, when I was an MSP, this was one of my biggest challenges, is simply educating the business end user. And if you can make that a priority, even a little bit, I think it can go a long way. And then beyond educating the end user, I think working with channel-focused vendors that can help an MSP navigate this fast-moving challenge of phishing threats and security in general, it is going to put their business clients' best interests in mind. When it comes down to it, email security against phishing, it's a multi-layered approach. You can't do it by yourself. And as far as I know, I don't think there's anyone that has a silver bullet against it.
Right. The education part I know is a challenge, especially for many MSPs, because they're used to technology, but the end user part is many times bringing someone else in who's an expert, or hiring somebody that can help put the testing in place and make sure that they're validating email security and other security precautions in a business. So what is your opinion as far as the mindset is do they have to do a lot of things different to try to get into that end user focus as opposed to dealing with the IT teams and the CEOs?
I don't think so. What it comes down to is the MSP is going to do what they do best from a technical side of things, and that's putting in the security solutions and the enhancements to the network. I think where they can really bring some extra value is having some way to then translate that into plain English or into business speak for the CEO or the decision maker to say, hey, this is what we're doing to help you, but here's what you should also know and what you should tell all of your employees about to protect you and them from these threats.
Makes perfect sense. So you had mentioned two phishing schemes. You brought that up a couple minutes ago, but they're getting more and more elaborate as we go. I mean, I see things every day, and I'm beginning to question every single email that comes in. And it's obviously probably a lot of people, especially in our space, are beginning to look at that. But what are some of the most creative approaches you've come across or partners have come across that you've heard about?
Oh boy. How much time did you say we had?
We'll give a couple examples, at least. But yeah. People don't realize the sophistication that's going on here today, and it's getting really difficult for end users. We're talking about training to distinguish between good and bad.
It really is. And the variation, like you're saying, is it's all over the place. Now, thankfully, I think the most common ones, at least from what I'm seeing, are being caught at our perimeter and being put in quarantine. And some of these schemes, just as examples, they range from like DHL and FedEx shipment documents, IRS important updates, and unfortunately you can't see me doing my air quotes as I say that. I've seen service desk and Apple account expirations, PayPal and library fees. I mean, I can go on for a while. And as an observer, it really is impressive how much variety exists out there. But as a security professional, it's downright mind-boggling.
Yeah, even when you look at events like the Olympics going on, I mean, they're getting very specific and timely, and Valentine's Day and holidays, you can really catch people off guard with some of these schemes.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the scary things is the sophistication is starting to pull in relevancy within our lives and within our business environment. So just as an example of you asked about some of the most creative approaches we've seen, I think one right now is kind of a social engineering attempt that has enough information to compel a user to make a bad decision. And it's this tax season, so one of the big ones we see right now is a W-2 form scheme. And what it does is it gets a person to potentially provide some very sensitive information to like a fake payroll provider or a human resources representative. Now, the business client themselves, it may not impact their business, but that can lead to identity theft of their employees. And let's face it, an employee dealing with identity theft, they're going to be stressed out. They're going to be distracted. They're just not going to be as productive because their financial life just might be turning upside down.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, a lot of these are more personal attacks, but they still do have business implications, short and long term.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So let's, how big a role does email security play in government and industry compliance? Because that's another area where MSPs can set themselves apart is being that consultant expert of, for their clients. Which rules and regulations should MSPs be most concerned with, or are you finding to be more common in the channel?
Sure. So this is also a very big question. And so number one, I think email security is paramount to both government and industry. So just starting with government, MSPs that work with governments, and whether that's at the federal level or state and local, they're going to have to demonstrate that the security conforms to some standard. With government, especially if we're talking about federal, you've got NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and within that, FIPS, which is the Federal Information Standards, and that encompasses a wide range of standards that the government tries to follow. And depending on the agency that an MSP is going to be working with, they're going to be dealing with specific cybersecurity standards based on whether it's just like a housing authority versus the Department of Defense. So a lot to be discussed there, and I think MSPs that have a vertical or really specialize in that are going to probably be more comfortable when it comes to addressing those issues. Now, when it comes to individual states, they may even have their own standards as well. So, there's another complexity to think about. Talking about industry itself, I think compliance in industry, for the most part, I would say it's a little more well known, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily understood all the time. The one we talk about all the time or hear about all the time is healthcare and HIPAA and high tech. Those two regulations have all sorts of rules, all sorts of standards. One thing I do, though, really like to tell our partners is if you're going to be looking at HIPAA compliance and whether it's email security or anything else, really remember that HIPAA is about behaviors, not about technology. The technology can assist in enforcing those behaviors, but it's not about technology. So something to always remember.
All right, processes.
Yes, exactly. Processes, and of course the technology can help enforce those processes, and that makes the world of difference in terms of complying with these things. In the financial sector, which is the other big one, we have SOX and FINRA. A lot of security there is simply protecting the account information, protecting the transactions, and really having a paper trail, what it amounts to, so that if somebody does have a problem with an investment or what may have happened during a transaction, the email security is now it's beyond just filtering phishing attacks. Now you're talking about archiving and being able to pull information out of your database of communication.
Archiving is one of those interesting ones too, because I think people tend to overlook that part. But there's several industries that's major compliance. Plus, if you're a provider, if you can offer that to your clients.
It is, absolutely. And actually something that I probably should have mentioned with government. A big deal with government is the Public Information Act, and somebody can come in and say, I want this information. And because it's public, the government is supposed to be able to turn around within a reasonable amount of time and say, here's everything on that request. Without a good email archiving solution, how do you know you can really do that? So that is another important aspect.
Yeah, excellent.
And going back to industry again, we just mentioned healthcare and financial sectors, but there are MSPs out there that work with other verticals. And they can be regulated quite a bit as well. We don't talk about them as much or hear about them as much, but construction, manufacturing, biotech, even nonprofit organizations, all these different types of industries, they've got various levels of regulations they need to comply with as well. Sometimes those come from an outside entity, and oftentimes they're even self-regulated rules. But when it comes down to the MSP having a conversation with these industries or government, you really need to be ready with those email solutions so that you can say, I've got you for security, I've got you for archiving, and really encryption, I think is huge nowadays and really should be a conversation starter, and that can lead to bigger things.
And when you mention those three particular features or offerings, the first thing that comes to my mind is lawyers who don't even technically fall under a lot of these compliance issues. But it's important for them to be efficient because time is money, and also to protect their clients' privacy and all the information they're sharing too. So the compliance things kind of go beyond compliance. Is how do these things affect those that in industries or that are in the local communities that may not necessarily have to adhere to them, but the features of the technology can definitely benefit them.
Yes, I agree. And something that we kind of forget about or maybe even take for granted is your reputation. Email communication and what happens when there's a breach can put a black eye on an attorney or an organization, and sometimes you're in a situation that's unrecoverable, and your reputation could be the beginning of the end. So it's a big deal.
We've seen a lot of that in the news the last couple of years for sure.
Yeah, we definitely have.
So let's move on with Office 365 is like the big elephant in the room these days, and cloud applications are gaining traction, and we're moving a lot more information outside the corporate walls, which is a trend that's probably going to continue for a while. But is it becoming more difficult for MSPs to address their clients' email security problems with these transitions or transformations going on?
So I personally, I don't know that it's necessarily becoming more difficult, but it is definitely different. And I guess depending on who you ask, different might mean difficult, but that's probably a whole nother topic. And so I guess in full disclosure, I personally believe Office 365 is awesome. And I think many cloud applications, they offer great value, and they can be a huge opportunity for MSPs to leverage. So, Mail Protector as an example, everything that we're doing right now, we're building our solutions to work in this cloud-enabled, device-agnostic business world. And where I think MSPs can find challenges addressing email security concerns of their clients when it comes to Office 365 and this data being outside those corporate walls, it comes down to complexity, I guess. It's a bit different, but honestly, when it really comes down to it, it's not much different than when we managed on-premise Exchange servers or small business server environments. I don't know how many service providers out there would stand up those systems without putting some type of third-party security solution in front of it. At least not many that I remember sharing war stories with. But as with anything different, it's going to have a learning curve. And I can understand that securing a service that you can't touch, and in Office 365's case, it's kind of this multi-tenant monster. So those are different ways of thinking about it. And it can be tough to troubleshoot too, because the native tools are not exactly user-friendly. So I don't know, I guess in summary, I don't know that it's more difficult. It's just that the complexities of the change are probably what's messing with some of the MSPs.
Excellent point, and I agree with you on the value of Office 365. It's big, and I was moderating one of the user groups that's on social media yesterday, and the question came up: I have Office 365 for my clients, but do I need to have additional security protections on board? And it was interesting to see that there was probably 65 comments on it. And with the exception of maybe one or two, they said you definitely need to add another layer of protection on it, even though they have basics built in. What are your thoughts on that? That's probably an area where people think is what they have good enough.
Yes. So I am so glad to hear that the majority of people are thinking that way, because I think that there is an element of saying, hey, it's Microsoft. They've got this. They're one of the biggest tech companies in the world. And while there's some truth to that, adding solutions to enhance Office 365 is really more about the experience for the business end user and somewhat for the MSP, because you don't want to force them to have to learn Office 365 complexities. That in and of itself can be the strategy that improves the enforcement of security best practices. So it makes life easier for the MSP and for their business client, because you now have more transparency through tools that you understand better. Office 365 does a decent job, but just like on-premise servers and the things we did 5-10 years ago, Office 365 is nothing but a server, just it's in a different data center that you can't touch. And as long as people remember that, I think it's a little easier to wrap your head around the need for the third-party enhancements to make Office 365 that much better.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, with a lot of applications, it's the layered approach, especially when it comes to security. Makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So let's switch a little bit here. I want to talk about email encryption, and why hasn't it become a standard for businesses, and should it be, Mark?
Sure. Well, I guess similar to Office 365, I think historically email encryption has just been difficult to use. The business client, email encryption often meant they had to have a plugin or an extension to Outlook, and then that communicated back to some encryption service. So when the business sent an encrypted email to somebody, the recipient, they would typically have to go through a registration process. Sometimes they'd have to download an application. And then they'd have to log into that service to read the secure message that was sent by the business. And even if all those steps went perfectly as designed, I'm sure you can probably see the potential for frustration on the part of either one of those end users.
Great.
And we haven't even talked about really the MSP's experience, just kind of around managing email encryption. Some of my experience has been, well, number one, you have to configure that solution. Then you have to go register each of your business client users. You got to download and install the Outlook plugin, possibly punch holes in the firewall. And then somewhere down the road, the plugin just decides to take a vacation, and then your help desk just blows up with encryption support. and it's a frustrating endeavor. And kind of to take it a step further, if you're not in front of your computer using Outlook with the plugin, you can't send that encrypted message. And nowadays, how often do we communicate through our smartphones, tablets, all those great cloud-enabled applications we just touched on? It's not all about Outlook anymore. So I think that's been one of the major hurdles for email encryption, is just the complexity of using it.
Makes perfect sense. Now, you introduced a new service in 2017 that I alluded to earlier on. How does that factor in with these issues you're talking about?
So one of the things that Mail Protector really identified was kind of the challenge of using email encryption. So we wanted to make it easier, because we do believe email encryption, it should be a standard for all businesses. Mm-hmm. If you think about how we communicate and what we're communicating in a business sense, even sole proprietors, they're going to deal with sensitive information from bank accounts and EINs to contracts with their vendors and customers. And all of that should be encrypted to protect everyone's interests. But because it's been so complex, we realized this was just not going to gain any traction without making it easy enough for the average person. So the intention that we took when all of this was designed, to kind of lay out an example. What if a mortgage broker wanted to send an encrypted email and was going to attach closing documents, and it was going to come from their CRM so that their normal workflow did not change? And the recipient was going to be someone on an iPad who normally does nothing else beyond just email communication and playing Candy Crush on it. Like, this person doesn't even have a computer. How do you successfully make email encryption work in that type of scenario? So that's what the Mail Protector team went to solve, and it needed to be easy for both of those users. And I think that's what our bracket email encryption service solved. So with ease of use, now we can start working towards email encryption being a business standard. And MSPs at that point can really start thinking about it as something that they include in their service packages, just like they would firewalls and antivirus. It's just what they do.
So how is the support for MSPs? As you mentioned, it was complicated using other systems. Does Bracket solve that problem for them?
It does. So number one, we don't rely on plugins or add-ins or installed software. What we do is we encrypt the emails as they pass through our infrastructure. So as long as our partners can explain to their end user, hey, we need to encrypt something, and this is whether they're on their smartphone or at their computer using Outlook or any other device, put brackets around the subject line, and we're going to know that message needs to be encrypted. And then when it comes to viewing these messages, it's all done through a portal, which is web-based. So again, there's that cloud application, and it's accessible and usable from anywhere on any device. And that removes a lot of the kind of the support headaches, because you're not having to worry about a plugin that may not work with this version of Outlook or this operating system, or some weird firewall configuration. It's all being done real slick behind the scenes using the security certificate layers and TLS and really a lot of these standards and regulations that we touched on earlier, so that it complies with these rules and makes life easy for the end user and for the MSP.
We all love easy. That's the nice part.
Yes, that we do.
So Mark, what's next for email security? How can partners, always trying to look a few steps ahead. It's not the channel is not a bleeding edge, or a leading edge. It's more leading than bleeding, I should say. So what should they be looking at for the next couple of years on the horizon that could be a problem or could be an opportunity for the channel?
Sure. Well, so kind of going back to the idea that email communication is ubiquitous. I think we need to understand that email security today really extends beyond filtering what's coming at us, and that it's no longer confined to an office or to an email application. So email security has to also be outbound. The outbound messages that a business sends. We kind of discussed that earlier as well, that you need to protect the reputation of the business. It needs to comply with regulations. And to truly leverage the power of kind of the email security enhancements such as archiving and encryption and whatever else may be coming down the road, it really needs to take into account both inbound and outbound. You know, we talked about the threats of phishing attacks, and that the phishing attacks, they affect all manner of devices. So that's why we need to have visibility into both directions of email communication. And in terms of staying ahead of the game, I'm a firm believer in technology being a tool, but we as MSPs, we as an industry, I think what we need to do is focus on the people behind their emails. Think about, how do they function? How do they work with their messages and their messaging platform, and what risks come with it? Those phishing threats, they're going to continue to evolve. They're going to take advantage of email's ubiquity. And if we can identify when and where a business client could be at risk, that's going to give us the leg up in protecting them, and potentially could demonstrate an MSP's value on something that's critical to their business.
So paying attention to email, not that MSPs don't think it's a crucial part of the security thing, but maybe spending more consulting time and digging a little deeper to find out what are the needs, the workflow, all of the issues around it a little more comprehensively than maybe they have in the past would be a good strategy moving forward.
Yes. Yeah. Take advantage of the quarterly business review conversation with the client to really understand what they're doing day to day. And if you're not doing quarterly business reviews, man, you got to start doing it, because that's where you find out this information.
Great. So any final thoughts before we close the podcast? I think in general, MSPs are very aware that securing their business clients is important today. And this increase in regulations and complexity of attacks, I think it's making security really a challenge for an MSP's practice, and not everyone has the resources to be an expert. So when an MSP is looking at their options and potentially performing their due diligence on vendors, please consider the value of working with channel-focused organizations. So Mail Protector, for example, is 100% committed to the channel partner. So what that does is it gives us the luxury of avoiding distractions from consumer solutions or direct sales. So we try to put ourselves in the partner's shoes and understand how email security solutions are going to help our partner and ultimately their business client. So that support strategy is really able to focus on educating, servicing, and promoting our partner's expertise. And even though security is more complex today, and the MSP potentially can't be the expert, a channel-friendly resource can fill that security skill in everyone's best interest. Very good. Well, on behalf of IOTA, I'd like to thank you, Mark, for joining us today, and appreciate those who tuned in to our discussion as well. I'd also like to encourage our listeners to take a few minutes and check out the great cybersecurity practice building content that we've added to the association's website. Go to iotssa.com. Thanks again, and please have a fantastic and highly secure day.